More than 7,000 to 8,000 Americans are bitten by venomous snakes every year. Yet, thanks to modern medicine, only a handful die annually. Now compare that with the American frontier 2 centuries ago. Back then, settlers feared snake bites almost as much as they feared starvation, hostile weather, or disease. But almost nobody talks about the more important part of this story. Because the deadliest thing wasn't always the snake. It was the myth people believed about the snake. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why one simple misunderstanding may have cost more frontier lives than venom itself, and why that same pattern still shapes the way humans react to danger today. Imagine standing in a dense forest somewhere west of the Appalachian Mountains in the early 1800s. You have no hospital, no antibiotics, no emergency hotline. Your nearest doctor could be several days away, if one even exists. Every rustle in the grass feels like a warning. Every shadow might hide a rattlesnake. To the settlers pushing deeper into unfamiliar territory, venomous snakes became symbols of the wilderness itself. Silent, invisible, and seemingly everywhere. But here's the first surprise. Historical records suggest that snakebite deaths were far less common than most people imagined, even in regions where venomous snakes were widespread. Diseases such as dysentery, malaria, cholera, typhoid fever, and infected wounds consistently killed far more settlers than snakes ever did. So why did snakes become one of the greatest fears on the frontier? That's where this story begins. Fear doesn't spread because something is common. Fear spreads because something is memorable. Psychologists call this the availability heuristic, our tendency to judge how likely something is based on how easily we can remember dramatic examples. A rattlesnake attack is unforgettable. A slow death from contaminated water isn't. One becomes legend. The other becomes a statistic. Settlers exchanged stories around campfires. My cousin died within an hour. A child stepped into the grass and never came home. Someone found 3 rattlesnakes under a cabin floor. Were these stories always false? No. Some were tragically real. But stories travel differently than numbers. Every retelling sharpened the danger. Every generation inherited not only the wilderness, but also its myths. And here's a question worth asking. What happens when fear becomes more influential than evidence? Because that's exactly what many frontier communities experienced.
At first glance, the settlers' response seems completely reasonable. If snakes are dangerous, avoid them. Kill them when you see them. Carry homemade remedies. Teach children never to wander into tall grass. Simple enough. But almost every one of those solutions contained hidden problems. For example, many settlers believed the venom spread instantly through the body. That assumption changed everything. People would panic. Some ran until exhaustion, unknowingly increasing blood circulation. Others cut deeply into the bite with knives. Some attempted to suck out venom by mouth. Others burned the wound with hot iron or gunpowder. Today, medical science tells us these treatments are either ineffective or can make injuries worse. Yet at the time, they weren't viewed as superstition. They were considered common sense. And that's the unsettling part. People weren't dying because they ignored knowledge. They were dying because they trusted the best knowledge they thought they had. Pause for a moment. How many beliefs do we hold today that future generations will see the same way? Here's where the story becomes even stranger. Not every venomous bite is actually venomous. That sounds impossible, but it isn't. Many venomous snakes can deliver what's called a dry bite, injecting little or no venom at all. Modern studies suggest dry bites occur in a significant percentage of encounters, although estimates vary by species. The snake has a reason. Venom is expensive. Producing it requires energy. A snake hunting food doesn't want to waste that resource on something it isn't trying to eat. Instead, many defensive strikes are warnings rather than executions. Think about that. The animal people imagined as an unstoppable killing machine was often trying to avoid conflict altogether. But settlers couldn't know that. Every bite looked like a death sentence. And once that belief took hold, panic often became the second injury. Sometimes the worst damage came after the bite, not before it. This raises an even bigger question. If snakes weren't killing as many settlers as people believed, then what actually was? Don't answer too quickly, because the evidence points somewhere most history books barely mention. If you've made it this far, you've probably realized this story isn't really about snakes anymore. It's about how humans interpret danger. And the deeper we dig into frontier records, the more complicated the picture becomes. Because while settlers spent enormous energy preparing for snake attacks, entire communities were quietly being devastated by something far more ordinary. Contaminated wells, poor sanitation, mosquitoes, malnutrition, infections, threats that lacked dramatic stories but produced far greater death tolls.
Yet fear rarely follows mathematics. It follows emotion. And that simple truth shaped settlement patterns, medical decisions, and even local folklore for generations. Here's something to think about. If you had been living on the frontier with only the knowledge available at the time, would you have acted any differently? It's easy to judge history from the safety of the present. It's much harder to recognize how uncertainty controls human decisions. That's why this isn't just a historical mystery. It's a lesson about trust. Trust in experience. Trust in tradition. Trust in what everyone around you believes. Because sometimes the greatest danger isn't the threat itself. It's the certainty that you've already understood it. And in the next chapter, we'll uncover the contradiction that changes everything. The frontier wasn't defeated by snakes. It was trapped by something far more difficult to see. Let's return to the question we left hanging. If snakebites weren't the leading killer on the American frontier, what was? The answer isn't hidden in one dramatic event. It's buried inside thousands of ordinary ones. A contaminated bucket of water, a poorly drained settlement, a tiny cut that became infected, a mosquito bite carrying malaria, a crowded cabin where disease spread faster than anyone realized. Those were the enemies settlers faced every single day. Historical records from frontier communities consistently show that infectious diseases, poor sanitation, malnutrition, childbirth complications, and accidents claimed far more lives than venomous snakes ever did. Snakebite fatalities certainly happened, and for isolated families far from medical help, they could be devastating. But they were never the constant, civilization-ending threat that popular folklore often suggested. So why does history remember the snake more vividly than the well? Because one creates a story, the other creates statistics. And stories survive longer. Here's where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Many settlers invested enormous energy preparing for the danger they could see, but the greatest risks were often invisible. No one hears contaminated water. No one notices bacteria entering a wound. No one sees malaria parasites moving from mosquito to bloodstream. The most dangerous threats rarely announced themselves. And perhaps that's one of the oldest patterns in human history. We prepare for spectacular disasters while quietly adapting to ordinary dangers. Think about it.
Castles were built to stop invading armies, yet entire populations were devastated by plague. Ships survived violent storms, only to lose more sailors to scurvy than combat. Sometimes the enemy isn't the loudest danger. It's the one that never asks for attention. This is where our story stops being about frontier America. It becomes a story about human nature. Let's pause for a second. Imagine you're a parent living on the frontier. Your child wants to explore the woods. What warning comes naturally? Watch for snakes. It's a clear threat, easy to picture, easy to remember. But how many parents would have warned, boil the drinking water, wash that wound, stay away from stagnant pools? Those dangers felt ordinary, yet they were often far deadlier. If you were making decisions with the knowledge available in 1820, what would you have focused on? There's no easy answer, and that's exactly why this story matters. History isn't just a record of what people knew. It's a record of what they believed mattered most. Now, let's examine another myth that refuses to disappear. Many people still imagine venomous snakes as naturally aggressive animals that actively hunt humans. The evidence tells a different story. Most venomous snakes strike defensively. Human beings are simply too large to be prey. Biologists have repeatedly observed that snakes generally avoid confrontation whenever escape is possible. Rattlesnakes even evolved warning rattles that advertise their location, an unusual trait for a predator. Think about that irony. One of the animals people fear most literally evolved a built-in warning system designed to prevent unnecessary conflict. Of course, that doesn't make snakes harmless. Venomous bites remain medical emergencies. Anyone bitten should seek professional medical care immediately and avoid outdated treatments like cutting the wound, attempting to suck out venom, or applying tourniquets, unless specifically instructed by modern medical professionals. The danger is real. But reality is more nuanced than mythology, and nuance rarely becomes folklore. Here's something historians often point out. The frontier wasn't conquered because people eliminated every danger. It expanded because people gradually learned which dangers deserved the most attention. That lesson took generations. Improved sanitation, better medical knowledge, vaccination, scientific observation, more reliable communication. None of these developments made snakes disappear. They changed the way humans understood risk. And once understanding changes, behavior follows. This reminds us of something surprisingly philosophical. Fear is often like a shadow at sunset. The lower the light of knowledge, the longer the shadow appears. As understanding grows, the shadow doesn't always disappear, but it becomes its true size. Perhaps that's the deeper lesson hidden inside the snakebite myth. Knowledge doesn't eliminate danger. It puts danger into proportion. If you've stayed with me this far, you've probably noticed that this investigation has quietly changed subjects. We started with snakes, we ended with perception. That's because myths rarely survive by being completely false. They survive by wrapping a small truth inside a much larger misunderstanding. Yes, venomous snakes killed settlers, but starvation, disease, contaminated water, infections, exposure, and accidents killed far more. The tragedy wasn't simply that people feared snakes. The tragedy was allowing one visible danger to overshadow many invisible ones. And that pattern didn't end in the 19th century. It still influences public health, politics, technology, finance, even our personal lives. The questions change. Human psychology doesn't. So let's return to the question we asked at the very beginning. Did the snakebite myth kill more settlers than starvation ever did? Strictly speaking, history doesn't support that claim as a literal fact. There is no credible evidence that myths about snakebite directly caused more deaths than starvation itself. But the investigation uncovered something arguably more important. The myth distorted attention. It shaped behavior. It encouraged ineffective treatments. It amplified fear. And it distracted people from quieter threats that were statistically far more lethal. The real story was never about counting snakebite victims. It was about understanding how human beings decide what deserves fear.
And perhaps that's the hardest lesson history offers. Because every generation believes it sees danger clearly. Every generation has its own snake, its own invisible well, its own stories that feel truer than the evidence. The only question is, which ones are we living through right now? If this documentary challenged the way you think about history, I'd love to hear your perspective. What modern snakebite myth do you think society might be overlooking today? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this investigation worthwhile, consider sharing it with someone who enjoys history told from a different angle. And if you'd like more evidence-based historical mysteries that separate legend from documented fact, subscribe and join us for the next investigation. Because sometimes, the most fascinating discoveries aren't the answers history gives us. They're the questions it leaves behind.